The doll arrived on a Tuesday. Donna Higgins was a nursing student living in a small apartment in Hartford, Connecticut. Her mother had found it at a second-hand store, a large cloth Raggedy Ann doll with button eyes and a stitched smile. She thought it was charming. She bought it as a birthday gift. Donna set it on her bed, propped against the pillow, and didn't think much about it after that. That was 1970. Within a week, she noticed something was wrong. The doll was moving. Not dramatically, not the way things move in movies. It was subtle enough that Donna spent the first several days convincing herself she was imagining it. She'd leave for class with the doll sitting upright on the bed, hands flat at its sides. She'd come home and find it slumped in the corner chair. She'd move it back. The next morning, it would be somewhere else, a different position, a different room. Once, she found it kneeling on the floor beside the bed, arms forward, head bowed, in a posture that didn't make sense for a stuffed doll. Cloth doesn't hold a kneeling position. There were no internal joints, no wire frame. She picked it up. It was limp, completely limp. She told her roommate, Angie. Angie had noticed it too. They started paying closer attention. They began marking the doll's position before leaving the apartment. Coming home to find it moved became a daily occurrence. Sometimes it was small, a hand raised slightly, legs crossed when they'd been straight. Sometimes it was across the room entirely. Once, they came home to find it sitting at the kitchen table. They had not left it at the kitchen table. Donna told herself there was an explanation. There had to be. Maybe the vibrations from the street outside. And maybe the vents. And maybe she was sleepwalking and moving it herself without remembering. She was a nursing student. She believed in things she could measure. She was not someone who believed in haunted objects. Then the notes started. Small pieces of parchment paper appearing in the apartment, written in a child's handwriting. The messages were short. Help us. Help me. We need help. Donna didn't own parchment paper. Angie didn't either. They searched the apartment and couldn't find any. They couldn't explain where it was coming from or who was writing it. The handwriting was consistent across every note. Rounded letters. Careful printing. The kind of handwriting that takes effort.
They called a medium. The medium told them the doll was inhabited by the spirit of a young girl named Annabelle Higgins. She said Annabelle had died on the property years before, a 7-year-old child found in the field where the apartment complex had been built. The medium said the spirit was lonely, that she had attached herself to the doll because she felt comfortable around Donna and Angie, that she just wanted to be loved, that she meant no harm. Donna felt sorry for her. She told the medium that Annabelle could stay. That was the mistake. Within days, the energy in the apartment changed. The notes stopped. The doll's movements became less frequent, but something else started happening. Angie's boyfriend Lou began having the same nightmare on repeat. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, gasping, convinced something was holding him down. He'd feel a pressure on his chest, heavy, deliberate, and look down to see the doll on top of him, hands around his throat. He'd try to move and couldn't. He'd try to shout and nothing came out. Then he'd snap awake, and the doll would be across the room, exactly where it had been when he fell asleep. Lou didn't believe in any of it. He said it outright. The spirit story was nonsense, the medium was a fraud, and Donna needed to throw the doll in the trash. He was loud about it. One afternoon, Lou was alone in the apartment waiting for Angie. He heard movement in Donna's room. He was certain someone had broken in. He moved toward the door carefully, pushed it open, and found nothing. Just the room. Just the doll, sitting on the bed. He turned to leave. Something hit him from behind. He spun around. No one was there. He looked down. His shirt was torn across the chest. 7 distinct claw marks raked through the fabric. The skin beneath was red and raised. He hadn't felt it happen. He hadn't heard anything. The marks were fresh enough that they burned when he pressed his hand against them. By the next morning, they had faded completely. Donna called a priest. Father Cook came to the apartment. walked through the rooms, and felt uncomfortable enough that he called someone else. He called the Episcopal priest Reverend Hyson, who called the one person in the country who had built an entire methodology around cases exactly like this one: Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens had been investigating paranormal cases since the 1950s. Lorraine was a clairvoyant. Ed was a demonologist, one of the only non-ordained demonologists recognized by the Catholic Church. They had walked into houses that had driven other investigators out. They had documented cases that had no rational explanation, and watched those documents get dismissed and then reopened years later when something worse happened. They came to Hartford. They walked into the apartment. Lorraine didn't touch the doll. She stood in the doorway of Donna's room and looked at it for a long time before she said anything. She told Donna and Angie that the spirit's story was wrong.
Not because there was no presence attached to the doll. There was. But it wasn't the spirit of a little girl named Annabelle. It was something that had never been a child. Something that had never been human. It had studied them first. It had watched how they moved through the apartment, learned what would make them feel sympathy, and built a story specifically designed to get invited in. The little girl, the loneliness, the help us written in a child's hand. All of it calculated. The moment Donna said it could stay, the invitation was complete. What was attached to the doll was what demonologists call an inhuman spirit, a demonic presence, and it had used the Raggedy Ann doll the same way a hand uses a glove, not because the doll mattered, but because the doll was already inside the apartment, already in Donna's bedroom, already something she touched every day. Ed Warren told them that if the doll stayed, the attachment would deepen. It would move from the object to the people. That was always the progression. Object first, then space, then person. Lou's wounds were the beginning of the physical phase. It would get worse. It always got worse. Donna gave them the doll. Ed wrapped it in a white cloth without touching it directly. He placed it in the back seat of his car. On the drive home, the car swerved violently 3 times on a straight road. Ed sprinkled holy water on the back seat and kept driving. When they arrived home, he placed the doll in a chair in his office. The next morning, the doll was in a different position. Ed built a locked glass case and placed the doll inside it. He lined it with blessed objects and sealed it. He put a sign on the front of the case. It reads, "Warning, positively do not open." The case has been opened twice by visitors who thought it was a joke. The first man flicked the glass and dared the doll to do something. He died in a motorcycle accident later that day. His passenger was hospitalized. The second incident involved a couple who visited the Warrens' occult museum in Monroe, Connecticut. The man mocked the case. He and his girlfriend laughed about it on the way out. She called the Warrens a few days later. She said her boyfriend had been having violent nightmares, that he'd woken up 3 nights in a row with marks on his skin he couldn't explain. The Warrens drove to their home. They brought a priest. It took hours. The occult museum closed in 2019 after Lorraine Warren's death. The collection, including the doll, was moved to an undisclosed location. The Warrens' nephew, Tony Spira, now manages the estate. He has said publicly that the doll is still secured, that it still moves inside the case sometimes, that it's been seen in different positions through the glass. He says it's never been destroyed because destruction wouldn't help. The doll was never the source. Burning it, burying it, throwing it into water, none of that would matter. The thing inside it doesn't leave in the cloth and cotton stuffing. It never did.
Donna Higgins moved out of the Hartford apartment shortly after the Warrens took the doll. She finished her nursing degree. She rarely spoke about what happened. In later interviews, she said the part that stayed with her wasn't the moving, or the notes, or even Lou's wounds. It was the medium's story about Annabelle. How perfectly it fit, how exactly designed it was for her specifically, a young woman living alone, away from family, someone who wanted to help, who felt guilty saying no.
The entity had read her correctly before it even made contact. It knew she would say yes. It had probably known before the doll ever entered the apartment. She said she thinks about that sometimes. How long it had been watching before it introduced itself. The locked case sits somewhere in Connecticut. The doll inside it is old now, the fabric faded, the button eyes unchanged. People who've stood close to the glass say the temperature near the case is always slightly wrong, colder than the room should be, even in summer. Lorraine Warren gave interviews about the Annabelle case until the end of her life. She called it one of the most dangerous they ever handled. Not because of what it did to the people in that apartment, though that was bad enough, but because of the method, the patience of it, the precision. Most of the cases she and Ed documented involved entities that frightened people, that came in loud and violent and obvious. Annabelle came in quiet. It made itself small. It made itself sad. It asked to be loved. And it waited for someone to say yes.